Well, first of all, a huge thank you to Janma for inviting me to share these stories. And thanks to all of you for uh, listening in on this presentation with a somewhat mysterious title. Uh, here are two logos, and sorry I missed the Israeli flag. It really should have been here, as I thought as I walked over and saw a number of Israeli flags in town. So here are two logos. One is BAMCAP, that's the logo of my VC firm, and the other logo, of course, is the logo of Volcano. And essentially, these stories are about both, because both have been tremendously influenced, even brought about by experiences in Israelis, experiences in Israel and Israelis. Let me see how this works. There we go. So let me introduce myself briefly. As Juan Diego mentioned, I'm from Panama. That's a country on the other side of Central America. Originally from Panama and forever from Panama. Studied in the US for a few years. Then ended up in Spain by a fortunate accident some 30 years ago. And I've been doing venture capital for the past 22 years. Lots of lessons learned. And I'm going to tell you especially about the second half of these 22 years. But before I do that, let me also introduce the rest of our team, which has formed really around these stories. I'll summarize a little bit. There's Alberto, who's based in Miami. He's also been here in Antigua a number of times. Alberto built an interesting company called CLA Direct, which has been bringing Israeli technology to Latin America for decades, particularly to telcos and utility companies. There is Jim Sheward, the guy on the top right. Amazing guy. Jim built the leading company in a software category called Mobile Device Management, FiberLink. Sold that company to IBM, came to do a sabbatical year in Spain and got entangled with us, and we're trying to keep him still entangled. And lastly, Christian Hultner, Swedish, living between Madrid and London. And Christian ran for many years very successfully a company called Element 6, leader in industrial diamonds. And I emphasize the backgrounds because one of the things that's worked for us very well is being very different and having very complementary backgrounds. So here's story number one. It's about this gentleman. It's a lot about a lot of people, but I'll start. But it's principally about David Mendelvik, whom I had the good fortune of meeting in 2005. And the way that came about was because of a chance visit to Israel in 2004. One of these fortunate accidents. A friend organized for a group of us to come to Israel for the first time. January 2004, a very tough time to visit Israel. Middle of a second intifada. A lot of tension was in the air. Mark, this friend, the first stop he organized for us was to come to Ramallah, where he had actually organized for us to meet Yasser Arafat, who was still alive. Yasser Arafat did not show up, but a few of his ministers did in Ramallah, war zone at that moment. That day, we ended the day having dinner with Shimon Peres, whom you will know by countless stories and reputation. And I have to say, at the end of those first 24 hours in Israel, I was really enraptured, enamored of Israel. Happy to say that continues many years later. Amazed by the vibrancy of the place, by the difference in opinions, the intensity of debate, and especially the widespread commitment to peace and prosperity. So that visit actually predisposed me to being very interested when David called some months later about his venture number 4. He'd already done 3 before. And basically, David and team develop technology for small cameras. In 2005, small cameras on phones were not that advanced. He and team did something really interesting. They were the first to do computational photography. That is to take an image from a CMOS and process it with software to make it better. And that actually was a very short-lived sub-story, because we ended up having 3 offers for the company in the first year and selling at the end of 1 year at a nice multiple to our investment. David then was made chief scientist in Israel between 2008 and 2011. And to my sort of great surprise, he called me for his next venture, a company called Corephotonics, which was more of the same, more technology for small cameras, except now small cameras were a huge thing. Smartphones had arrived. We're talking 2011. The giants were starting to show up, Apple, Samsung, the 4 Chinese. To me, it was a no-brainer. It was the same team doing more of the same. No need to do due diligence. I knew these guys were known that Samsung knew who they were, Apple knew who they were. They knew the space as well as anybody. And what they were proposing to do was to make technology to enable dual aperture cameras, cameras with 2 eyes. Today, they're pretty standard, 3, 4 cameras. Back then, it sounded sort of strange to think of phones with more than 1 lens. Another part. When David called, the first time I invested from a fund that was supposed to invest mostly in Spain, so we made an exception. It's a longer story, but this time around, there was no fund to make the investment. And to my good fortune, David pushed us on being his first significant investor, as opposed to taking a small, humble check from me. So, to my further surprise, he agreed to come to Madrid and to go to London and show the project to friends, like-minded people, and within literally a couple of days, we were oversubscribed to back him. And we formed a first special purpose vehicle as BAMCap. The story ended up being a fascinating one. Between 2012 and 2018, we ended up selling to Samsung for 10 times the size of the iSquad experience. It could have been perhaps 100 times, except we had a small glitch on the road, which was Apple tried to basically use our technology in an unauthorized way. And we ended up having to go to litigation against Apple, which was, sort of an important thing to do. That lawsuit continues, by the way. They're, not the first person you want to get into a legal argument with. And last on David, now it's 2022, and just a couple of weeks ago, we started working with David for the 4th time. The 4th venture we work on together. But here at Corephotonics, somebody called Shraga entered my life, our lives. Shraga came on the board of Corephotonics, representing another investor called Magma from Israel. And another great Israeli friend. I remember being very nervous about meeting Shraga at the outset. His background was having been head of intelligence for the Israeli army, having built a company, taking it public, and here was this Panamanian, on this board with him. It took us about 5 minutes to become very good friends, and Shraga soon started telling me about 2 disciples, Doron Harlev and Leon Amariglio, who had worked with him before going to Boston to do MBAs at Harvard and MIT. Shraga had introduced them, and they had started a company called Rhythmia Medical, doing diagnostics for people with arrhythmias. And so I started hearing about the arrhythmia story and hearing about Doron and Leon and getting to know them super well before actually meeting them. That company was eventually sold to Boston Scientific, a very nice exit. And Shraga eventually, I eventually had the chance to meet Doron and Leon. And this is where really story number 2 kicks off. Doron and Leon, after Rhythmia Medical, spent about 15 minutes at Boston Scientific, like good Israeli entrepreneurs, and started not one new venture, but 2 new ventures. One to do surgical devices, to do single-use endomechanical surgical devices, which is what basically makes laparoscopy possible. It's a big space, until now very dominated by Johnson & Johnson and Medtronic. Doron started doing more electrophysiology. Now not just diagnostics, but therapy to cure arrhythmias. Hopefully none of us end up having to deal with arrhythmias, but they're a big issue. And if you don't check arrhythmias, they tend to lead to greater complications. What Affera has done already is the technology today is successful about half the time, and it takes like 8 to 10 hours to do one of these procedures. With Affera, this is being done in a couple of hours, and it's being successful 90% of the time. So suddenly, with this Israeli story, we found ourselves working with a couple of entrepreneurs, cutting edge, like the guys at Corephotonics, but now in medical devices. And I should say Affera was acquired by Medtronic just last week, without any sales, without FDA approval, based on 200 clinical cases for an amazing valuation. Something above the magical threshold of the unicorn status. Leon, meanwhile, is already active selling these single-use endomechanical devices in about 8 major countries around the world. So, this is story number 2. And, by this point, we have become sort of agnostic as to where we invest, have generated a lot of excitement among our core group of 4 partners, and all the friends, really, because they are friends that invest with us. So again, very, very formed as VC investors by these experiences. And then story number 3, last but not least, the headline here is Yossi Bardi. I believe a few dozen of you here at Volcano have had the good fortune of meeting Yossi over the years. He's been to Antigua in good part thanks to Janma several times by now. And trying to describe Yossi is a real challenge, so I won't even try to describe Yossi. Just point out that he is considered one of the real founding fathers of Israel, the startup nation. He, of course, built ICQ and sold it to AOL in 1998 and changed the Israeli mentality with that feat. Yossi does lots of things around the world, but one of his favorite things is to bring people together, about 100 people together for these experiences called Kinnernet. 100 people from all sorts of walks of life, creatives, academics, entrepreneurs, social entrepreneurs, and there's no agenda. These are called unconferences. The only expectation is that everybody will share something that she or he is passionate about. And they end up being quite magical. And so I had the good fortune of being invited to a couple of these Kinnernets and getting affected by them. And together with a few others, we started thinking about doing these in Latin America. And we called them Kinnerlats. And Kinnerlats are a lot of fun. They're great to start working on. There's a lot of excitement. And when they actually happen, they are amazing. The very first one was here in Antigua. But I should say, in between, it's the most excruciating, horrible experience. Because Yossi likes these to be free. So you need to find sponsors to finance everything. That way, money is not an issue for anybody that attends. And they're all done by voluntary efforts. So you know, miraculously, they end up happening. We did the first one here in Antigua. Janma was maybe most responsible for the success of that first one. Then we did one in San Pedro de Atacama. You can see a little bit of the Chilean desert there. Then we went on to Oaxaca, and we did the fourth and most recent one in Panama, with a lot of support from Selena, by the way. So that's, you know, story number 3, and really, it's well, Janma, of course, would be doing amazing things in any case, but I think this energized her in the direction of Israel, in the direction of innovation and innovation summits. So, Janma, you know, thanks for being such an important part of this story and for having us here today. And, well, you know, these are my stories. I've told them pretty quickly. But, you know, I hope you found them of interest. I thank you for listening. And I have to say, I can't be but incredibly grateful for these years of entanglement with Israel. They have been so inspiring, so much learning. So if you haven't there, I would encourage you to visit and become entangled as well. Thanks.
Could you share one of the most interesting moments you have experienced at a Kinnernet or a Kinnernet event?
Most interesting. You know, there are so many interesting moments at these. I think maybe the most interesting, memorable moment was when we first arrived in Antigua in 2016 and suddenly had a Kinnernet happening in Latin America. That was, I mean, very, very special. The people we had here, also, for me, I'd been here in Guatemala maybe a couple of times, but I'd never really connected with Guatemala. And over those days, wow, I also became entangled with Guatemala. So I would mention that one.
Well, thank you very much. Big round of applause for Roberto Saint Malo.